I just wanted to share, to sort of inform all of the presentations, a definition of community engagement. So obviously it's frequently used, it means different things to different people, and even the notion of community itself, I think we could probably debate for a couple of hours. But I just wanted to share one definition, and it is from our work with the Caribbean Development Bank. So we've been working very closely with Richardo and his stakeholders. And one of the things we've done together is develop a guidance note, a sort of a toolkit. And the way that we described community engagement there was that it could be considered as how we involve, inform and build relationships with beneficiaries and stakeholders of activity. It could be considered as a strategy to build relationships of mutual trust within and beyond communities, so not just within, but also beyond. And it's about diversity and ensuring the diversity of local people's issues and concerns are heard. So that's just one definition. I'm sure you might have better ones, but I think probably all of us agree the importance to recognise that critical role of the community and the importance of, whether here in the UK or in Somaliland or in the Cameroon or the Congo or in the Caribbean region, the importance of that role of community and of their voice as well, and in shaping policy and projects and programmes. So our colleagues today, we invited them because obviously there's a lot that could be said on this subject. We invited them to perhaps focus on one aspect of the project cycle, so whether that be community engagement in planning programmes, in implementing them, in monitoring or evaluating them, and obviously there's a role for community engagement in all of those stages. And I think each of them is going to focus in on one of those stages. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. So this is Teodil. So Teodil is the Congo Basin Strategy and Engagement Leader at the World Resource Institute, which is based in the US. So in this role, he is responsible for advancing the organisation's mission in the Congo Basin. And obviously that involves a lot of engagement with stakeholders and different types of community. Prior to that, he was the country manager for WRI in the Republic of Congo. And prior to that, he worked with civil society in Yaoundé in Cameroon as a regional advisor to the Field Legality Advisory Group. And he was heavily involved in civil society organisation research and capacity development. He also worked at the Centre for Environment and Development, where he led a team of 20 in initiatives on land, forest, climate and mining governance. He was also the facilitator of the African Community Rights Network, with leading NGOs from West, East and Central Africa. So he has a master's in anthropology of the environment, and also very pleased to say he is about to defend his thesis here at the University of Wolverhampton. Teodil, let me give you the floor to share with us some of your lessons and experiences from the Congo Basin region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ella. I hope you can hear me okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Teodil. Sorry, I had muted myself. We can indeed. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you for that very flattering introduction, Ella. I guess you ended where I would have started. I'm very pleased and honored to be a PhD student at the University of Wolverhampton, but I'm also pleased to be an associate or to have been an associate to the CIDT a couple of years ago, and to know some of the people in the room actually. So I'm so pleased to be here. And I'm so pleased to be able to share a few reflections on an ongoing initiative. It's a very large effort. It's almost disproportionate, one might say. It's a donor initiative. So one would probably believe it's not necessarily, the kind of efforts where communities are to be engaged one way or another. So I'll start with a brief introduction on what that initiative is about, and say a few words on why we found it critical to have communities involved or engaged, to use that terminology. And then, so I'll move on to speak on the specific kind of engagement that we did before sharing a few lessons at the end. So the effort in itself is called Forest People Climate. It's not a WRI-led effort. It's a collaborative of donors, but also civil society organizations, experts, whose ambition is to halt and reverse tropical deforestation. But it's not just about stopping deforestation. The intention is also to support a just and sustainable development. And so this initiative emerged coincidentally on the sidelines of the of COP26, sorry, in Glasgow in 2022 and 2021, right? And then the aim was to rally big donors to mobilize 2 billion in new philanthropic funding. So you see the kind of ambition here, it's as I said, almost disproportionate. And some of the players in the effort include the CLUAL, the Climate and Land Use Alliance, which is really the host of the effort. And their role is to get the funding, reach communities on the ground. There is the Climate Lead, formerly called Climate Leadership Initiative, and it's more of a donor advisor. They play more of the role of a donor advisor. And then we have WRI, my institution, the World Resources Institute. And our job is really to establish a monitoring and learning framework system that really helps assess progress and ensure that we can demonstrate the extent to which we are delivering the mission, the ambition that I mentioned earlier, because the ambition is not just about, again, raising the 2 billion, but it's really about supporting efforts to halt deforestation while supporting sustainable development. So yeah, this is just a list of donors, a list of some of the many people many institutions that are involved in this effort. I don't think I need to name any of them, but just for your reference, or if you're interested in knowing more about the FPC, there is a link to the website. So how does the FPC operate, the Forest People Climate operates? Before alluding to this, I just wanted to say a few words on why it was needed. So there was a massive, powerful, and mind-blowing piece of research in 2021 on the kind of resources that reach, front line communities, indigenous people and local communities that are already battling to stop deforestation and protect the vital forest of the world. And that research, one of the main recommendations of the research was that less than 1% of climate and nature finance reaches indigenous people and local communities, less than 1%. And in some places, it was even found that it was as much as 0.2% that could get down to the community. So there was a big gap between the narrative according to which communities are the one at the front for protecting forest and the kind of support that they receive for doing that. And so the approach that was adopted by FPC for not only generating the funding, so not only attracting finance, but ensuring that it's used appropriately, consisted of working based on strategies, co-constructed strategies, but more importantly, living strategies. The idea of living strategies being that we wanted to have an adaptive approach. And so the target is to have 10 living strategies, including 3 regional or countries focused strategies and 7 thematic strategies. And so I am obviously based in the Congo Basin. I'm based in Brazzaville, although I'm Cameroonian, but And so, our strategy, the strategy that I would like to quickly discuss is the one that looks at the Congo Basin. And please remember, as I said earlier, I'm speaking from the side of WRI here. So I will not discuss the whole of the strategy, but really just the monitoring and learning part of the strategy development process. And so a few words on the Congo Basin. I'm sure most of you know that it's the second largest expanse of forest in the world. And recently, most recent data has shown that it's becoming, unfortunately, the largest carbon sink in the world. So basically, it's becoming the largest the largest lung of the world, so to speak, because forests are, as you know, the lungs of our world. So it's very important in itself. It's important to protect these forests, but more importantly, it's home to 30 million people who get everything that they need for the food there, but also who have cultural attachment belonging to the region. And it supports the livelihoods of over 100 million people. So you see, it was critical that in the way we think FPC, that we ensure that communities, indigenous people and local communities are front and center, basically. So what was it that we wanted to do? We wanted to have this monitoring and learning framework, and we were just about to design it. So this presentation is very much at the design phase, but the design phase not of a project in itself, but of the monitoring and learning framework. We came from the standard most MNE's tools, most monitoring and evaluation tools that we all know are very much about helping the donor know that their money is serving the purpose that it's supposed to serve. So MNE, monitoring and learning, is very often just about, it's a unidirectional, it's a tool that allows unidirectional dialogue between those implementing work on the ground and whoever has granted funding. And so, of course, we acknowledge that it helps know whether any initiative is succeeding. It obviously helps know if the money is reaching the right geography, but we also thought that it was critical that we have a co-design process, that it's designed not just by the donors providing a service to the donor in this case, but that it's co-designed by people on the ground. So that was one critical element to our approach. The second one was that since, as I spoke earlier, we are dealing with living strategies, it was critical also that the kind of indicators, the kind of tools that we put in place enable adaptive management principles. And then it was also, just ensuring that the monitoring and learning framework can actually be a tool for strengthening the capacity and partnership of and with the people on the ground. And that, of course, it's obviously evidence-fed. So with all of that in mind, I'll have a few slides just to say we had the first phase that was about, classic design of the funding strategy. You remember I mentioned 10 strategies. I will not come to those. I will not mention this first step, but rather I will say a few words on how we try to embed our MEL framework into the strategy, and the way we did it while strongly engaging with communities, various communities, as well as, and I will describe that community engagement. I'm not sure we'll have enough time to discuss the reality check because that's actually where we are now. So we spent time drafting these indicators, and please, no need for you to try and read everything here, but what we have here is more of indicator statements. You can't see anything like specific targets and so on. It's not smart, as Ella would say. But the idea was, the reason why it's not smart precisely is that we engaged with various communities, but also civil society organizations. And what they said basically was that you can go for best indicators, classic X% of people, 20% more people trained or capable of, I don't know, using a certain tool, those very rigorous indicators, or you can actually use this process of identifying indicators as a way of tracking what actually makes sense for people on the ground. So that forced us to get out of our zone of comfort, of our comfort area, so to speak, and to come up with these very large indicators. Just to illustrate what I'm saying, we spent a great deal of time discussing with a couple of community groups, but also civil society organizations on this idea of well-being. Most projects in the region, most donors would never pay attention to well-being simply because there is no commonly shared and agreed upon indicator out there on well-being. There are a couple of indices, there are a couple of tools, but nothing that everybody can support, basically. And so no donor would genuinely accept to have an indicator on well-being. So just the fact that we had an indicator on well-being, because that's what mattered for communities, was in itself very, very powerful. So, and it's the same for all of those indicators. And when we were discussing with people, they said, well, this is what we are interested in. And we are sure you'll figure out a way for tracking progress against these indicators. The kind of consultation that we did was with over 100 people in these 5 countries. So I've been talking about the Congo Basin, and I assumed that everybody in the room may know the Congo Basin. But just to clarify that there is no, again, unified definition of the Congo Basin. Some of the 5 main countries in the region are those that are on your screen now: Cameroon, Central African Republic, Gabon, Republic of Congo, and the famous Democratic Republic of Congo. But there are other countries that belong to the Congo Basin, including Rwanda and so on, Burundi and others. So our job was focused on these 5 countries, and this is where we did a lot of our engagement to come up and to kind of validate the indicators that I just mentioned. Some of the things that we did was, most of the work was actually with community leaders, civil society leaders, but also with indigenous people and community, with leaders from indigenous people groups and local community groups. And I'll come back to that in my final reflections. But we also had a series of informal discussions, conversations with experts across the 5 countries that I just mentioned. So, of course, the beauty is that the donor approved the monitoring and learning framework. I just want to pause for 20 seconds and confirm that in this case, the engagement was not with all communities in the region, and that we actually only reached out to 4 groups actually in total across the region, whereas we consulted a broader range of civil society organizations. So my final slide is on a few lessons. And IPs and LC stands for Indigenous People and Local Communities, while CSO, of course, stands for civil society organizations. So as we were working on this process, we did realize what actually Ella was describing at the beginning, on the fact that there are various ways of perceiving community engagement. And I would say that it has to do with people's philosophy, but it also often has to do with just task contingency, if I can put it that way, with the reality of the specific task that you're dealing with. So let me say a water pump project may have a different approach to engagement as opposed to this kind of process. So, and we very soon noticed that our process was, at the end of the day, as we were thinking, reflecting on it, we had difficulties in striking the right balance. So while the donor was interested in engaging more so than any other donor of this caliber has done before, while they were interested in engaging in consulting a broad range of communities, they wouldn't have budgeted enough to consult the thousands and thousands of communities that we have in the Congo Basin. So we had to try and strike the right balance between indigenous people and local communities on the one side and CSOs on the other side. It's difficult because CSOs very often present themselves both as supporters of IPs and LCs and as representatives. So we had to be able to navigate those roles and ensure that we bring in the voice of communities. And it was tricky, I must say it. It was difficult because those with expertise, those with the right language are CSOs. With the right language quote unquote, please. The second item was related to, or the second main lesson was that it was not so easy to manage expectations. We came with, you know, the language, with that big number that I shared at the beginning, 2 billion US dollar. That's a lot of money for when you look at funding flowing for forest conservation. There is not so much. There is no donor. There's actually only 1 or 2 donors globally that have that kind of funding for forest conservation. So this was huge. And then in the consultation process, in the engagement process, I must say that one of the single most difficult balances to play was between saying a lot, being open about what this funding is about, and making sure that the communities as well as the CSOs that were consulting did not see this as an opportunity that they should be applying for while we're doing consultation. So, and it was tricky because it had things to do with the kind of responses that we had at the end of the day, but also because it's somehow the engagement could have led to some extent to people, you know, competing each other, even in the kind of narratives that they would be sharing. The element, the learning element, is very, very difficult, and I'm not yet sure that we know exactly how to capture it, how to make sure that there is engagement even as we learn, and that is not just about learning, but that whatever we learn from that engagement can affect the course of the program or of the investment in the region. Is very challenging. And the last lesson I would say has to do with the fact that as WRI in this case, we were brokers because we were, you know, speaking, bringing knowledge, lessons from one world to another world, and vice versa. I'm not sure if Doxa translates in English, but the idea of Doxa is that of the prevailing narrative, right? And here it was we very easily quickly figured out that as we engage for this type of initiative, we need to be careful and remain, as you know, remain mindful of the fact that if we are not careful, we might be just help being translate the exact language of the donor without doing the other, without bringing, messages from the ground, without being able to change the prevailing social order in place, which is very often the hierarchy between a donor and the communities. So those are some of the four main lessons that I wanted to share with you after this long presentation. And let me pause there and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Teodil. That was really, really informative. And there was a few things that definitely struck me from the work we've done with communities, the managing of expectations, the hierarchies, the engagement, sort of balance between engagement and learning. So I thought you brought out some really interesting points. Thank you so much. And I apologise, in my introduction, I forgot to mention the most important thing, which was that Teodil was a very valued associate of ours on one of our key projects, the Citizens' Voices for Change, in those 5 countries that he shared. So my apologies, Teodil. So I'm going to pause to take a few questions after each presentation because I know not everyone can stay. So just to see online, if you would like to share, if anyone has a question, or indeed in the room. I know I've got a couple, so yeah, please. So we have, sorry, Chris, who is, go ahead. So Chris is from, well, you introduce yourself, Chris.
Okay, I'll do my best speaking voice from the back of the room. You can hear me, okay?
Can you hear Teodil?
Okay.
No, I'm going to repeat. Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Okay, so I'm a subject lead for wildlife conservation here at the university.
So Chris is a subject lead for wildlife conservation at the university.
And I've had some PhD students in the past working with communities to extract information as well. So I had a student working in Libya, for example, which is an interesting one.
So he's had a student working, PhD students working in Libya. You've got a better idea. Yeah.
What was?
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin. I'll try to do it on the end. Yeah. Well, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
So I've had, we got lots of feedback this end. Okay, I'll try. So what was interesting was that you were saying that there were the engagement with communities, that in various places you were talking to different sized groups of people. Was there any pushback from communities about you acting as a broker or people coming in and trying to work with them, or were they fully accepting that the fact that there was almost a neutral person involved to actually help facilitate things? Sorry, I've now been ordered to mute myself.
Ella, should we take? Should I respond directly?
Please, Teodil, we're just trying to control the the sound settings. Yeah, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your question, and it's very interesting because when you come with the announcement that a donor has mandated me to do the MEL framework for the strategy, and the donor is bringing 2 billion, some of which will flow to your might flow actually to your specific village. Actually, everybody is precisely welcoming you. And then I think that's the trick, because the lack of pushback, I love the question, because the lack of pushback is what interrogated us, because we are, I believe, not the first actors to come with numbers like this. And we very soon realized that people were very much acceptant of our role as a broker, but precisely because they saw us as a broker, and not because they saw us as a potential agent for changing the social order, basically, what I call the social order. They saw us as an ally that you may rather have if you need to get some of the funding. And to me, that's what we had to navigate and be clear on the fact that, you know, communities, some of the communities and the CSOs that were engaging had the right to also refrain from engaging to the process. And it's very challenging. You can't come and say, I'm speaking in the name, quote unquote, of someone who has $2 billion, but you still have the right to say that you're not interested in this process or you're not interested in participating in this process. So I guess that's also where we had the responsibility of putting enough safeguards for those who were engaging to be able to speak freely, to share the kind of a framework that they were interested in. And that's what led to having something as big and as loose as the concept well-being in one indicator, because you wouldn't see that in an indicator of this type. We actually tried to push that back, but we did not succeed. So we had to let go. So that's the kind of response I can provide at this stage. But thank you so much for your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Is there any other question for Theodore? I mean, I was interested in one of your slides. You talked about, I saw you were talking about supporting living strategies. And I was just wondering what that was, but also you talked about a co-design process. So wondering if you could share, how did you actually go about it? How did you really sort of engage communities in a meaningful way? And I know that this acronym of IPLC, when we first started working on one of the earlier projects, I didn't know it, but it's Indigenous People and Local Communities. So I'm guessing that that was also, perhaps you had different strategies for different segments of the community. So I don't know if you can share anything about the kind of what you actually did on the ground, as it were.
So thank you so much, Ella. The idea of living strategy is simply that while this is about trying to set the path for the donor to know where to invest, we want the donor to be mindful of the fact that things change very fast, and that communities' interest today might change tomorrow. By the time, for example, we were designing these strategies and doing the consultation for the monitoring and learning, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the largest of the 5 that I mentioned, 60% of the whole territory of the Congo Basin, they were doing a presidential election. So the whole government, or most of the government, has changed since then. So some of those changes can happen, and we really wanted to embed this notion of adaptive management in the way the strategies are designed, but also in the way they might be implemented in the future. I believe the word on your second point on co-designing, I believe it's probably pretentious to say that it was properly co-designed, because as I could elaborate earlier, you saw that we consulted around 120 people. But then consulting is not co-designing, right? Because consulting means that you've already thought about the framework, and then you have people contributing and sharing ideas on that framework, maybe refusing it or not. But in my view, co-designing could be about coming and starting from scratch together, which is not what we did in this case. I want to acknowledge and be very clear on that. So we prepared some of the indicators after speaking with experts in the region before bringing those indicators to the ground. But the initial indicators, there is a big difference between the initial indicators and what I shared earlier and what the donor has approved. So it was not 100% co-designed, but those that we consulted had a significant influence on what has finally been submitted to the donors. And you're right. Finally, IPs and LCs, yes, it's for Indigenous people and local communities. And you have 100 million IPs and LCs in the Congo Basin. and they are all different because most of them are different ethnic groups. Let me pause there.
Thank you very much, Teodil. I have other questions, but I think I should move on because we have two more speakers. So they also may want to kind of chime in on some of the things you've picked up on already. So our second speaker, then, thank you very much, Teodil. And I think we didn't have any questions online.
No questions online.
But colleagues online, please do feel free to chip in on the chat. We'll be fielding your questions. Our second speaker is Dr. Zachary Bade, and he is a Somaliland academic, and he's published quite a range of articles and research. So Zachary has expertise in different multidisciplinary areas, including development studies, project management, and sociology. So he's working in development and relief, in hostile and crisis area context particularly, and he has particular expertise as Teodil was talking about, the monitoring, evaluation, assessment and learning space. So he's I can vouch for this, so we've delivered some training together, so he very enjoyable, and I learned a lot from his expertise. So he's particularly experienced in the design, establishment and managing and monitoring and indeed evaluating of projects, programs and social research. And CIDT, recently we worked together with Zaki. He was a part of our team, and he and Danny worked very closely in the qualitative methodologies of the third National Somaliland Development Fund survey. And as I mentioned, we were also co-trainers, or should I say he was the lead trainer on some work with the Civil Service Institute in Hargeisa as well. So Zaki, I see you already shared your slides, so I'll hand to you. You have the floor. Please, let's hear from your side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella and Daniela and the team from the University of Wolverhampton. I will share the experience and lessons on community engagement from Somaliland. So I will keep going since Ella has already defined the community engagement. In Somaliland, we were in a large team of evaluation who were doing the second phase of the evaluation of Somaliland Development Fund 2. So as a qualitative team, we were focusing on a small portion of the evaluation, which is community governance tool. So we were doing a qualitative survey and we were collecting some qualitative data about community participation and then accountability, transparency, and inclusivity, which are the main pillars of the community governance. SDF has its own separate community engagement team, which works engaging communities and encouraging community members to take part in decision-making processes. In community governance, we were studying where the community involved in the governance process. So we had a tool called a party tool, which contains those four. When it comes to accountability, we were collecting the data from the community members in order to know whether the community were held in decision makers responsible. And according to a transparency theme, we were focusing on whether the community is engaged to have a clear and accessible information about decision-making process and outcomes. When it comes to the inclusivity, we were ensuring that the government framework consider the needs and perspectives of all stakeholders, including marginalized groups in the Somali context, which women are the leading marginalized groups and youth as well. And in Somali community are organized into clans, and the social structure is mainly understandable if we focus on those clan dynamics. So those four themes were leading our community governance tool that we accessed across 4 different projects, which were including fisheries project in a separate region, livestock project in another region, fruits project in another region, and agricultural project. So I will share the lessons learned from these. When it comes to the participation theme, we focused on community involvement. The strengths that we saw during our qualitative survey was that active participation in initial stages were there, and utilization of local knowledge and resources when it comes to the agricultural projects. Since SDF has technical teams that help with the local farmers, they have their own local knowledge and resources, and they said that their voices were heard in order to enhance their skills and local knowledge. But and the challenge that we saw that was inconsistent involvement. And most of the qualitative data found out that they have the information of the project, which was already planned and which was already prioritized by the SDF or the government. And SDF is working on various projects, and also there is another National Development Fund which developed by the Ministry of Somaliland Ministry of National Planning, which prioritized the community needs. So some of the places you can see that community needed another project according to them, yet they were not part of the consultation, and the project comes from an up-down, and they are engaged that the project will start at this time and this and this and this. Another challenge when it comes to community involvement was that limited technical knowledge was there, although there was a difference across regions or across projects, but limited technical knowledge was one of the main challenges that limited their participation, the community's involvement in the project. Another thing is the consultation process. The community mentioned that successful consultation models were in place, and the community leaders were intermediaries between the project leading team or the SDF and the community members. So community have a community members that represents their interests. When it comes to consultation process, they mentioned that those committees take part, and some of them had taken part some trainings across different regions. The challenge that they face is there is no systematic process or superficial consultation, and as well. It's different from region to region or community to community. For example, agricultural communities as a consultation process was different from that of fisheries, since the fisheries community lived in urban or villages. The agricultural communities lived in countryside, but they had a better consultation process. As if you compare them with a livestock and a project, it's another story, and it's another different experience as well. These are the main issues with the participation theme. If I go on with accountability, we will see community structure, which established communities, mainly established by the projects. Although some communities have their own community structures, but according to our experience, they said that SDF mainly constructed and established these communities. They have also potential for a strong representation when it comes to the different clan members or different communities. But in terms of representation, we can see the weaknesses that women were not part of larger communities are there because of the local cultural dynamics. And youth were not also there as well. the challenges that they face in accountability was there was lack of transparency, which means that in some areas self-selected communities were there. For example, you cannot hold accountable with a community with a village leader because he took the power through inheritance, or his father or his grandfather had established the village. When it comes to the reporting grievance and complaints, there were some mechanisms in place, and they had points of contact. SDF had a representative in every region, and there were some project teams working there. But the challenge was that there was ineffective complaint handling because fear of repercussions. Some of the community's members said that they cannot complain against the community, especially for the road projects. And they said that some community members who did that were arrested by the local district authorities. So here, these are one of the main challenges that we have seen in our survey. And when it comes to transparency, in terms of information sharing, they had regular meetings, yes, and they used local methods, including they came under a big tree in the village, and everyone can come there. But the challenge is that they do not have a appropriate record keeping. They had a limited access to information because the information is carried by the community committee and the committee listeners. And on the top of that is that women cannot participate in this discussion. They are just listeners in some parts, and specifically for the livestock communities or livestock project beneficiaries. But when you compare to agriculture, in agricultural communities, people and women were part of the larger communities. And when it comes to fisheries, which is also in some urban areas, the fishing communities is led by a woman. So it's a different thing to the different communities. And most of them do not have a proper record keeping, and you cannot get minutes from them, but they held the information in their brain, and they say that we memorized the key points that we have discussed. In terms of record keeping, yes, strongest there's awareness of a need, and they said that they need a proper record keeping. And although some training were provided, but a lot of those communities are illiterate, while some can read and write, but they do not have the proper tools and to record. And there are inconsistent practices to keep the record, and mainly there is a lack of resource. There are a lack of resources that they can do this because they do not have a small office to do to meet. Most of them meet under a big tree or a school or somewhere. So these are the issues that we recorded while we were there. When it comes to inclusion, recognition of women's participation, and it's an important matter. It's an important matter emerging from the communities, and the community knows that it's important for women to get involved in those projects and decision making. Some communities, women were there, but they were not participating when it comes to decision making. But they were good listeners, which do not contribute to this. And the challenges that limited them is the cultural barriers. The cultural barrier also limited youth representation. And in livestock community, which is one of the worst, and according to their attitude, they are not ready to allow women to participate in community governance. And they were saying that women is for the house, while men was for the decision making. And there is a case that surprised us in a local community called Hahi. They said that it's a religious community, which we call in Chama'a. They are Sufi community, which is one of the Islamic teachings. They said that the first time that women were allowed to come to the market and to sell or buy something was 15 years ago, just 15 years ago. And before 20 years, if a woman comes out to the villages market, they were ashamed, and there was some punishment in place for that and woman who came out. This is one of the main challenges that we have seen in a livestock project or livestock communities. When it comes to diverse representation, there's awareness of need, and that inclusion and efforts are needed to take a good share in the next community governance or project. But there are some challenges. Power structure is limited to inclusivity, and there is a resistance to change. When you ask the youth why you are not there, they said that my father is there and I cannot be where my father is because of cultural issues and this. And the women also share the same experience, which and also they also has a experience that's more vulnerable than those of youth. Youth can speak, but women cannot. If I summarize the lessons that we have learned, there is an importance of genuine engagement that in the next intervention, SDF will need a genuine engagement. And the strategies that they can do is continuous consultation, involving all segments of the community, while avoiding tokenism and establishing and also there are some challenges that needs to be addressed, including there is no feedback loop that we have seen there, and the community members were complaining about this. Another issue is we need to build a trust in the next time, and the strategies that can build trust should be transparent process. There should be effective grievance handling in a place. And they said that they cannot reach SDF and they cannot report to them because SDF has a representation and local authorities also there. So they need that there should be transparent process in place and effective grievance handling. This can contribute to build a trust that the next projects will be in a place for better community governance. Challenge including overcoming historical mistrust. In some areas, there was a conflict between local community, a project and a team, and the beneficiaries as well, and mainly in the fisheries areas. Ensuring to overcome this challenge, all voices should be heard in order to build a trust. And also capacity building is necessary at this time, and it's beneficial to the community and to the SDF as well. Key areas that that's needed is financial management. Some communities has the ability to manage some of the materials given by the SDF project, and the community has some communities has a local efforts to collect some money from themselves in order to help those in need. So they need capacity building in financial management, inclusive decision making, communities taking and reporting trainings, all these. And the challenge is that limited resources are there for the community, which SDF needs to take into account. Thank you very much. Now, if you have some comments and questions, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saki. That was really fascinating, especially the examples that you were sharing. So the floor is yours, colleagues. Would anyone like to ask any questions or indeed share something from your own experience? Please, Priscilla, yeah. Do we need the... We'll just... we have a question for you. We'll just get our road and mic.
It's more of a comment.
And Daniela was also my colleague, so she should be contributing to the community to that response.
Sorry, no, it was more of a comment. You're muted. Can you hear us?
We're just having a few technical issues with the, yeah, go on.
In terms of regarding how the youths and parents can't be in the same setting, because it's funny how traditions are the same. Because in Nigeria as well, it's the same thing. It's frowned upon for youths and parents and women to be in the same meeting. The idea is that your father goes to that meeting and then comes back and feeds the family with information. So if that is still, and I know it's still happening in some cases, even in Nigeria, but it's no longer that prevalent. But how do we now overcome that? Because some of the initiatives, the programs are youth focused, are women focused, but if they cannot be there, how do we ensure that the right information gets to them and they actually engage and participate in what's going on if there's still this cultural element still at play? So it was just interesting to see the similarities from what
I don't know if you could catch that at all, Zaki.
I don't clearly.
Let me just paraphrase. So Priscilla's from Nigeria, and when you were talking about how different groups can't be in the same forum, so youths and parents can't be brought together in the same meeting. The idea is, and she was just endorsing that from the Nigerian context, and saying that the idea is your father should go to the meeting and then come back and share the information with you. You shouldn't all be sat there in the same consultation. So she was just saying, how do we overcome those barriers, even when we have programs which are targeting women or youth? How do we overcome those cultural barriers? I don't know whether that was something you could answer, or whether you've got experience of, or any sort of just thoughts on that.
One of the interesting things is that all those communities had a youth committee in a separate areas, except few communities. We met with 16 communities, and only one of those communities lack a youth committee. So once you ask them, they say that as a youth, we have our own committee, but we are not in the larger community committee. But in some areas, for example, in agricultural areas, youth has some representation in the community committee. So I think we need a community awareness. We need to educate them that youth has the same rights and equal rights with a community, with other elders. And in our culture, which respects elders much more, even youth do not. Even if you ask the youth, why don't you go there, they say that they have some respect for their parents. And even so, it's a double-edged sword. The elders do not want youth to be involved. Another thing is that youth are reluctant and hesitant to join those community committees. So I think we need first we need to study the dynamics and the root causes of these, and from that we need to educate our youth. And I think our communities, that youth is the future of the community, and those decisions they are the ultimate beneficiaries of those decisions and projects. I hope Dani can contribute since she was my colleague at the.
Thank you, Zaki. Actually, could I ask you to close your presentation now so we can see you a bit more closely? Yeah, no, that's. I don't think that's something that's going to be a quick change in as you say, culture. It's quite deeply rooted. But yeah, if you could just stop sharing your screen and then we'll be able to see you. Danny, did you have anything to add there? Because you worked with Zaki closely on that one.
I'm going to try and project, and hopefully Zaki.
You are in the mute then.
Okay, can you? How's this? How are we going to do this? Ella, can you put your audio down? Yeah, that one. Unmute. Okay, great. I think that works. Yeah, great questions. And we found that very much the same with the involvement of women in this particular context of the Somaliland context, that it's a real tight balance between what the project objectives are, which was an economic inclusive growth. There we go. Quite a mouthful. So the project objectives had a very sort of specific job to do, which was to improve livelihoods and the prospects and the sustainability of livelihoods. And when you're applying that in a context of Somaliland, what did that look like? Agriculture. So it was goat herders, camel herders, livestock. It was, agriculture. I just said all those animals. That's the livestock project. The agriculture was about water management, irrigation, and crop production, and maybe sort of seed diversification. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but bear with me. I'm going somewhere with this. Fisheries. It was all about equipping local cooperatives with equipment to go out to sea to go and fish. What we've just spoken about, what I've just detailed, are predominantly male-dominated activities where women and youth are not at the heart of those activities. So in terms of what the project had to involve the women and youth engagement, were a set of tools to bring them into engagement. But I think Teardil said something quite similar, and I saw the synergy, was that actually we're talking about consultation here. We're not talking about participative engagement where we're looking at the higher end of Arnstein's participation ladder where you've got citizen power. It's very much that we saw the participation at the lower end. Now, for the different stakeholders, we very much saw that men were probably towards the middle, especially if they were community leaders or on the committees. They were in the sort of upper end of consultation, verging into degrees of power, whereas we saw the other stakeholders very much in the tokenism and, dare I even say, manipulation and therapy, where they are given sort of roles on paper but not really in practice. But I definitely hear what you're saying about how do we break that trend of potentially isolating populations that could be very much part of this. And I think it's a slow process. It's all about social change and behaviors, which never come around quickly. We thought what we heard from the field work was there was a real recognition that particularly women had a great wealth of qualities that a lot of the communities, I'd say, really recognized. And this was all around trustworthiness, loyalty, accounting skills, because they are predominantly the household keepers of the purse strings. Then why not start thinking about ways to capitalize on those already existing perceived aptitudes and qualities of women and youth and bring them into already, and these are sort of, for me, they were the entry points. So those are some of my first ideas. I'm not sure if I answered all the questions.
Thanks, Danny. I saw that Chito has come with quite a similar. I think Akinela, we already kind of spoke a little bit to how we overcome the challenges, but I'm not sure that we could answer that one. But Zaki, Chito came with a slightly different variation of the theme. So asking particularly how you managed to handle historical distrust issues. I don't know if you have any kind of comment on that one, or yeah, sort of distrust. I think you spoke to it a bit in your presentation. As someone who's just kind of dropping into the community, perhaps not known, do you have any sort of tips or tactics that you use? Or equally, did you observe anything in the project teams, any strategies that they were using?
Yes, since there are some mistrust in the community, we try to figure out a mechanism that we handled some of these. For example, in the fisheries community, local community, and the local community, the community, and the local authority were in conflict. So, in order to achieve our own objective and collect data, we listened all those, and we did some extra meetings with our community, those who had grievances. So, in order to build a trust, we showed them that we are in a position to evaluate the project, and that we are a separate and independent team from those who were running the project. So it's in our recommendation to build a trust, because when you go to the field, mainly some of those projects, specifically the fisheries project, there were a lot of conflict among the community. So our mechanism was that we listened and heard all the voices from different areas, and then record and suggest that SDF needs to consider all these. And we were doing, at this point in time, we were doing data triangulation. We listened to the community committees, community leaders, community members, and the local authorities as well. So the data gave us a comprehensive picture that there is a mistrust among this community. But for the other communities, everything was better, and there was no seemingly conflict among that community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaki. So I will move on, because I feel that our third panelist, which is Mr. Richardo Aiken from the Caribbean Development Bank, I feel he is, sorry, trying to get away. I feel he's itching to come in now with some of his examples to share. So it's my honour to introduce him. So CIDT has a long history with the Caribbean Development Bank. I think we've worked together on various different projects for about 10 years. So it's our pleasure to be working currently with Richardo and his team. And so Richardo coordinates the community development component of the Caribbean Development Bank's interventions, and that's across its 19 borrowing member countries. So his role is to support the design and implementation of effective community engagement strategies, so that to leverage really he's got a network of community development professionals that he works with, as well as civil society organisations. So to leverage their knowledge and perspectives to advance the bank's country engagement policies and strategies. And so part of his work is developing data-based approaches to assess and improve the capacity of civil society, but not just civil society organisations, which we've heard quite a lot about, but those individual practitioners as well, the community development officers. So he also particularly has a role in overseeing engagement efforts with Indigenous and First Peoples of the Caribbean. So we've heard a little bit about that from Teodil, our first speaker, about Indigenous peoples in the Congo context. So I anticipate that Richardo will be talking more on that theme to us. So one of the ways in which he does that is through the Basic Needs Trust Fund of the bank, which is an immense project which has been going since 1979, and it has impacted over 3 million people, basically through community-led development. So we've been working together since, I think, 2021, first collaborating on the guidance note, which actually we could drop in the chat, Danny, that might be a useful resource for some people, and now on some online modules. So we could send you a link to those when they're available. You might be interested. So Richardo, I give you the floor, and please, if you'd like to comment a little bit on either of the previous speakers and any of the synergies you see, please feel free to do so. So over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ella. And I want to thank and congratulate the CIDT team for organizing this, I think, timely intervention given where we are. And to my my fellow panelists, I think setting the foundation for my presentation as well. Just kind of having a conversation around how community engagement can be a key strategy for solving developmental issues in a broader context. So I'm speaking a bit about the Caribbean, understanding the role of community engagement in building the resilience of the Caribbean. And Zachary, I was almost tempted to change my title, having heard your two lessons, lesson 1 and 3 in particular. So I'll speak a lot to building on some of those points on the importance of genuine engagement. Keep that in mind. And lesson 3 from Zachary's presentation, which is dear to my heart, the importance of capacity building. And I'm thinking both go hand in hand. So let me start by giving you a brief context around the Caribbean. So we are considered to be one of the most vulnerable locations in the world as it relates to our vulnerability to different impacts, to different scenarios, including disaster risks, etc. And as you see, the impact is severe, and the projection that by 2030, the level of impact we are likely to have on our gross domestic product. So taking this up a little bit more detail is you could see definitely the impact of different hazards on our space. So 13 Caribbean countries between 2020 and 2017 were impacted by a natural hazard event amounting to damage estimated about $27 billion. And that's way more than that investment of $2 billion TODL. So you're seeing the impact that these scenarios can have. And you could see in the example of Haiti, Antigua and Barbuda, you're seeing the impact that they're having at a national level. This is easily one of my favorite slides. It was borrowed from the UN SDR. But each time I share this slide, we're seeing this community with a rock on the hill waiting to create havoc, likely to move speedily along the hillside and damaging house and lives of the persons living in that particular community. And maybe the last 12 times I presented this and I asked participants to share, what would you do in that instance? There are always some great ideas around trying to remove the rock, trying to break the rock, some persons even had ideas of using a helicopter to tie strings to the rock and move it to another location. And this is the heart of community engagement, because this is where community engagement starts. You have an issue in a particular space, and I mentioned earlier the Caribbean's vulnerability, and again, Zachary's point around the importance of genuine engagement. This is where it starts. So the first thing I would recommend is that you should engage the community, because you're not sure of the significance of the rock. You're not sure that they too have ideas. They are not just residents. They are people who would have lived in this space maybe for decades or hundreds of years. And as Theodore would have mentioned, indigenous communities, they are living in these indigenous villages sometimes for hundreds of years. So this is a classic example of why community engagement is important, that there's no solution that is community-driven that should start with the technocrats. It always starts with engaging the communities and creating a meaningful solution. So I'm again highlighting Zachary's point, lesson 3, about the importance of capacity building. And this is a transformative strategy for addressing poverty and enhancing community resilience. So community resilience is hinged on the community's capacity to transform their local space. It speaks to the community abilities to withstand shocks and stresses, offering a foundation for adaptive and poverty reduction strategies. So all these interventions we're doing geared at poverty alleviation, disaster risk management, capacity building, hinge primarily on that. And then the second point I want to raise that we'd often not consider is already our communities ready for these interventions. So even before you think through engagement, and I borrow this from the community engagement, community readiness model, where they're looking at four main dimensions, and I'll start with the lowest, the capacity to implement change. And I could see Zachary nodding as well, even though he's not on the screen, but I know he definitely liked this point. The community's commitment to change. What are the current attitudes and efforts? And Theodil also mentioned the cultural nuances as well. And this community climate is not related to the environment, but more so, what's the mood of the community, which is also linked to their attitude and efforts. So bear this in mind. I won't spend too much on this slide, but what we did under the Basic Needs Trust Fund, which is geared at poverty eradication interventions in different areas, such as education, providing increased access to education facilities, providing access to clean water. We also do some interventions around livelihood as well. And we decided to do an assessment of the capacity needs of these organizations that benefited under the Basic Needs Trust Fund. We're now in our 10th cycle. And we interviewed 32 community groups across 3 countries, with the aim to see how, in addition to our infrastructure work, for example, we could also focus on lesson 3 from Zachary's presentation on capacity building to have a multiplier effect within those communities. Just want to share some of these key findings. So even though these communities are charged with the responsibility to advocate change, we have 44% of those not being registered. We had 69% not having a constitution. There's no legal document that guides the organization. There's no clear vision to see what are you trying to achieve, why were you established? And the mission was the same gap as well. What is most alarming for us, bearing in mind the first slide, is that the most important opportunity or access that communities have to access development resources is through grant proposal writing, right? And we know of the myriad of grants available, not just across the Caribbean, but I'm sure from the examples you would have heard from the 2 previous presenters, you have heard a lot about those. And what we found here is that 94% of these groups had no experience in writing grant resources, grant proposals, despite a myriad, maybe hundreds of grant funding available across the Caribbean. But the groups, the organizations that need it most are lacking in these basic skills. I met with an indigenous woman during this exercise, and what she explained was that she would have participated in a number of sessions on proposal writing, but they were too short. They weren't structured to suit their need. So entities would have come in, spend 2 days, 3 days, and they leave more confused than when they first started. So this is not a case where they were not exposed to proposal writing training, but it's just that the training was not designed in a way to have that transformation. So again, and I heard Danny as well talking a lot about participation. So community engagement is hinged a lot on participation. But what about and this is aligned quite nicely with Zachary's point around the importance of genuine engagement, because the participation is one of those words that can be tokenistic. And we mentioned earlier about the Arnstein ladder of participation, etc. So on one hand, it offers a potential route for distribution of power, but it also potentially a means of giving a false impression of power. And we know for M&E projects or interventions, we tend to have a lot of information of on persons participating. So you have a community meeting. We had 200 persons participating. Wow, that is excellent. How many males? How many females? Great, excellent work, right? But participation or meaningful participation is way more than just that. So what happens is that sometimes communities are confused. On one hand, they're told that they can have their say, and then they're confused when they're told that what they say is wrong. So the big problem is that it purports to be bottom-up, and we know this bottom-up approach conversation is quite common, and it ticks all the boxes, but actually can be seen in reality as being top-down. So I love this. This spectrum of public participation was designed by the International Agency for Public Participation. And this, I think, is, for me, is transformational. To take a closer look at community engagement. So what you're seeing here is what we tend to do a lot is information sharing and consultation. But those are not the ideal levels of engagement that is required to achieve the involvement and the informed strategies that Ella mentioned, the mutually beneficial. You will not get those community development or community engagement objectives just by informing or consulting, right? What you need to do is to move to a greater level of involvement to see how are you involved. So you go to a community we want to meet. You don't just meet with the community, you say, where can we meet? Who do we need to meet with? And move to involve. Can we do this together? Can we have a community meeting where it's the Caribbean Development Bank, but also in collaboration with the community group? How can we collaborate on this particular exercise, right? What can you bring to the process? And as I shared in the my second slide, or third slide with the community with the rock on the hill, is that the collaboration is where the heart of engagement is at, because communities are not just beneficiaries, they are experts. They have lived experiences. They have great ideas. So the idea is, how do you collaborate with communities to create meaningful solutions for their community, for issues that are affecting them? And then what you'll have is that high level of community engagement, which leads to empowerment. So even as a donor, you have a particular role, but it is a shared responsibility that communities could have a voice. And we could also, and the project is not just measured primarily by our outputs or our objectives, but what objectives the communities want to achieve from this exercise and making it mutually beneficial. So I wanted to, and I'm happy for the question that was raised earlier. And when I heard the point, the question about what is the solution? And I think this is one idea that we could discuss. One of the approaches that we would have used for our community engagement activities under the Basic Needs Trust Fund and what we do at CDB is an approach where we try to identify the community engagement needs and preferences at the project design stage. So we're not going in to say community meetings, right? We want to go and find out, how should we engage? Where do you want to meet? What are your most preferred spaces for engagement? Where can we find the elderly person? Where can we find the women? Where can we find the youths in the community, right? So what you're seeing here in this particular community was that a large, in addition to the community meetings, that had a 23% preference in terms of the space that we want to engage on. And in the Caribbean, most of these church events are held on a Sunday or a Saturday, right? But you're seeing that the church is also one of these preferred spaces. And what you're finding too, for those persons who are between ages 26 and 45, they don't want to meet in the church nor at the community meetings. You got to find them at the shop and the bars. So here we are. So we often think that community meetings is the end all for community engagement, but in some instances, it sometimes represents different things in the community, where some persons who you want to engage with would never feel comfortable with going to a community meeting. Maybe because of who has the keys, right? Or where it is located, or a particular view about community meetings, right? So it's always good to have a start with a multiple approach, that who are we engaging with or who we want to engage, what are their engagement needs and preferences. And you're seeing that the group here between 56 and over, they want to meet at the church. So you can't find us at the meetings during the week. We're going out on the field in the community one time per week on a Saturday or on a Sunday to go to church. Otherwise, you need to meet us at home. Let me give you another example. We're also trying to figure out what was the preferred time of day that you want to meet or day of the week, right? So what you're seeing here, strange enough, is that Monday in this particular community is the preferred day of the week, as well as Sundays for some person. I'm thinking this is also linked to the church. And for the thought is that how can we not just have this one intervention approach, but one that is multiple and diverse, and then making commitment to engage afterwards. This is just one example, and I'm sure we could speak about this in the question and answer point section, just to hear some thoughts on this particular approach. So in closing, I wanted to share just this one last slide on what we developed for the basic needs trust force, and I just read from the section on project identification stage of the project life cycle. So what we do here, we try to involve a lot of community engagement activities where we have a lot of dialogue with communities. We identify their engagement needs and preferences early in the day, what those are, and what method do we use? We use prioritizations, we use community needs and asset assessments. We collect data and we review those data that already exists, and we use a lot of surveys, focus group discussion, community meetings, Transect, consultation, and participatory learning tool. In addition to that, what we're doing now, as you would imagine, that a key part of project sustainability is to ensure, because the project has a life, right? So we're in a particular community for 4 years, 5 years maximum. So the role of the community development professionals whose mandate is to secure community involvement and to lead on community transformation interventions, they also need to be a part of the process. And then their capacity becomes important in sustaining these investments. So that would have led to two things. One, the design of the community engagement online course that we designed that was focused primarily on the community development professionals working in the agencies responsible for community development across the Caribbean Development Bank's 19 member countries. And then two, what we found is that there's no community engagement course available for community development professionals across the Caribbean. So you have a number of courses being done at the international level, but the Caribbean, like Somaliland or different parts of Africa, they're unique in their own way. So what we found as well, in addition to the guidance note, when we did that in 2021, one of the feedback we got was this is quite useful and it's been utilized heavily across the region. But the thought is that if we had a course that outlined the theoretical and some action guidance around community engagement, that in a trainable capacity building approach, then that will also be useful. And we are now developing that in collaboration with CIDT, the first of its kind for the Caribbean. But it's not just for the Caribbean, but those international organizations or entities, project management teams, consultancies working in the Caribbean, they could also get an idea as to the most effective way of engaging Caribbean communities as a part of their project design. So the idea is that it is a dynamic process. Community engagement has to be in a way that is mutually beneficial. We should not start engaging before you understand and agree with communities what their preferences are. And I want to end where Zafri ended around the importance of capacity building. So my last point, which is a part of my thank you, is that in addition to having these interventions at the community level, infrastructure, I think one of the meaningful interventions that can make community engagement more genuine is to ensure that we understand what do they expect. And it's not always the project, it's not always the road or the school or they also have other needs. So the idea is if we could set aside a portion of that investment that is focused on capacity building, what you'd have are two things, two of many. One is that the communities could have the skills. So Zafir mentioned the financial management. And if you do an assessment, you could get even more detailed, realistic gaps that exist and building on those. So they could do two things. One, they could secure your investment. But when you return to that space for your impact assessment, 3, 4, 5 years later, what you'll have is a multiplier effect. That the communities now capacitated, that they would have secured the investment that was made, but they're able to engage other funders, they're able to do other things to continue to drive the transformation space. So in closing, community engagement has to be empowering, it has to be mutually beneficial, and sometimes it might mean putting your project objectives, your project goal on pause to allow the community goals to be achieved as well. Thank you very much.
Well, you got a sincere round of applause there, Richardo. Thank you. That was great, and I think even over here with this poor connection, we could feel the passion coming over the Zoom. I think I really love the sort of practical nature, the actual practicality of where do you find people, and that different people at different sections of the community are found in different places, a sort of preferred space for engagement. And I think all three of the speakers have really hit this paradox at the heart of community engagement, that we invite people to engage with us, but then we say, oh, actually, if this isn't the right time, or we don't really like what you said, or we just want to engage on this thing, but not the things that are important to you. So I think this, the takeaway for me is that it has to be mutually beneficial. And the real passion that came through, I was trying to get the quote, so I'll get it from the recording later. You said that communities are experts, they have great ideas. So actually there's a lot to be, it is mutual. It's not just a sort of tick box exercise. So before we sort of close our session, I'm sure we have one or two questions for Richardo about that really wonderful presentation. Just really, really stunning to see how that GDP can be wiped off in the disaster context as well, and how vulnerable some of the small island states are. So yeah, could I invite any questions from the room? Or any comments indeed? Any yes, please. Late, but I'd like to agree. Sorry, madam, would it be okay if my colleague brought the laptop? So we have a lady who will just turn us on mute.
Yeah, hello, my name's Maureen King-Taylor. I represent quite a few voluntary organisations. I came in late, I've been doing other things, but I do agree, you're perfectly right. We hold these community meetings, we don't ask the communities what day or what time is suitable, we just plan it with a long agenda, they don't come and we get upset because they don't come. So I'm taking that back from you to look into how we engage with the community and to get them to be part of it, rather than we're saying we've done this, here it is on a plate, let us work together. So thank you for that.
So tell us a bit about the kind of communities you are trying to engage, maybe where you find it works best to reach them, or where it hasn't worked for you, what the challenges, particular groups that you're struggling to reach.
Yeah. At the moment, I am working with a set of people that are underserved by the health NHS and also by other factors. I come from Warsaw, and I work with a group called Bread for Life, and it's trying to encourage people of ethnicity to access health services so that they can have a better quality of life. I also represent a group of women outreach workers, and that is to support them with befriending and also get them to share the skills that they have to the younger generation. The problems in getting them out, because quite a few of our people are elderly, so we have to consider their transportation, if they're on medication. We have to consider also, like you were saying, some people won't meet in a church, but they will meet somewhere else. So we have to look and see what room hire is available in the vicinity. We were quite lucky last year. We got some funding from NHS Mental Health to pick everybody up and bring them to the meeting. And that worked really well, but it was just a project. We can't keep doing that. But the funny thing is, once they were there, they didn't want to leave. So we've built on that to say, you know, well, come under your own steam the next time. So that's what I do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you as well for that. And I think that's a great example around the spaces.
Sorry, Richard. Just start again, because I think I was just adjusting the settings. Apologies. You have the floor.
Right. So I'm thanking her for her feedback. And I think that's a classic example of meaningful engagement. And I like, as Zaki put it, genuine engagement, right? And I think once you have those engagement gaps, it's always finding ways to mitigate those. So it's an ongoing engagement process. And even while you're engaging, you are re-looking, rethinking. It's always look with this participatory lens. It's always important to see who are the ones who are present, who are the ones who are missing, and why aren't they here? Is there another space? Is there another approach? It's actually that fluid, ongoing iteration that never ends, basically. Thank you.
Danny, please, I'll turn the mic on.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, just on the back of what you've just said, it really chimes with me. And from the experience that Zaki and I had in Somaliland, I see the synergies very much so with what you've said. And one thing that I came away with that was the power of communication, both the negative power and also the positive power that it has, and the real need to really define and be clear, and it's not just about the communication in the sense of sharing information and the two-way dynamic, but it's also having that reflective process of actually understanding, okay, I'm coming from this perspective, and I bring along all my baggage of like what makes me me, and the experiences that I've had, which will be slightly different to my colleague Zaki, who will be slightly different to my other colleagues that we work with. And it's just being reflective of, okay, well, we came into the project with an aim, with an objective, and we were representing, we were looking at the project from SDF, who also comes with their own positionality and own language. And the reason why I say this is because when we spoke about consultation and we were trying to gain perspectives of consultation and decision-making, well, what we understood as consultation and what we understood as decision-making was completely and utterly different from what it was understood by the communities that we were talking to. And actually trying to unpick that and going and having that shared understanding, okay, well, what does it mean for you? Because ultimately the project's working for you, and it's that balance between the project stakeholders versus perhaps the more rigid and more structured monitoring and needs of the donor and funder. And it was a real tussle. But it was, that was the two lessons that I came away with, was the importance of communication and the importance of reflective and adaptive practice. Communication is just so key, because I think Terdal actually said it happened in his context as well, was that the program that they're working with was multi-million, I think he said, and that's the value that stays in everybody's ears. But But actually, when you start dividing the chunks up, and your stakeholder who might be in a certain part of the country, in a certain community, only has a slice of that, and possibly the thinnest of slices, because it's going like sort of so many other places. But yet the thing that's resounding in their ears is the 2 million blah blah blah, whatever it might be. And well, how do you change the perception of what they've heard, and how do you better communicate that further down the line to correct, to improve those relationships, the rapport, the trust, and also the engagement that you have further on down the line with
Yeah, I had one last point. Thanks so much for that, Danny. So I think we had this scenario. We over the last 2 years, we sought to scale up, increase our engagement with indigenous and tribal communities across the Caribbean. Though through the BNTF, through the Basic Needs Trust Fund, we would have been in those spaces for decades. And when we started to ask them for the first time, how do you want to be engaged, right? The findings were alarming. They're saying that your community meetings, that you come to your communities and you have those community meetings, that's basically a waste of time, because we don't make decisions that quickly, right? Because for us, it's a lot of review with the elders and feedback and coming. So they're saying if you really want to engage us about projects or programs or anything at all, you need to be in our communities for 2 days, because they want to be able to meet and discuss and meet and discuss. You understand? So here we are for decades doing this thing and saying, yes, we're doing great work. But when you ask them the question, you realize that there's so much more that you could do as well. But adding that to Danny's point about the fluidity of it, and you're always evolving and learning new things, and there's a certain level of humility. And I think I was at a presentation last week in Trinidad, which is just a few, maybe an hour flight from here, and they asked me what do I think is the most important skill in community engagement, and my response was to shut up and listen. Because if we just spend enough time to listen to communities, I'm no longer an expert. I want to hear your voice, your views. So listening for me is that important skill. If there's one takeaway that I would want to have from this session, is just the ability to listen to communities. I think would be critical as well. But that's it for me. And thank you so much again. I really, really enjoyed my other fellow panelists, and I think it was a great exchange. And I certainly look forward to the next step. Ella, you know, I was made for next steps, right? So we won't be leaving this just here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think on behalf of all of us, we all agree with Akinola's comment in the chat. Thanks to the last presenter, he really nailed it. So I think you definitely nailed it, Richardo. Thank you. And Aronola is also saying, I think we need to be sincere with host communities. And again, how can we overcome the challenges, you know, through sort of thinking, a bit of pre-thinking. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Oh, I've lost Richardo. Maybe he had to go. Okay. Oh, no, sorry, we lost you for a second there, Richardo. Okay, so if there's no other questions or comments, thank you so much. That was such a rich exchange. And I think we'll, oh, yes, sorry, we do have one more here for you, Richardo. Do you want to go with the mic? I don't know what this question will be on, but I was also thinking about when we you know, Zaki talked a lot about the gender dimension. Obviously, in the Caribbean context, that's a little bit different as well. So I don't know if you talked about age as one of the dimensions, but whether you also have experience to share around gender was one question that was coming to my mind. But there's a gentleman here who's going to ask a question that may be more interesting, so I'll let him have the floor. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hi. My name is Carlos Bret. This is more like a question and comment. I found all this topic very interesting because I am an ecologist, and a lot of my interest in all my ecology career has been to try to bring what I do to communities. So, you know, we can implement conservation efforts into, you know, all the fisheries and all the activities they do. And I found that when you talk about empowering communities and all this consultation and bringing a framework to push all these projects forward, something I have found when trying to do some of the stuff I do, for example, one project, it's been the last project I work in since I did my master degree, is about economical valuation of natural assets. And when you try to reach the communities to put a value on these assets, it could be a value on the activities they do, or it could be the value they put as how much they care for the land just because it's there, just for the spiritual value. It's funny to see that sometimes they lack even the understanding of the money itself. Like, what is this land valued maybe for someone coming from Europe to one of these tropical areas, and they will say, oh no, this is amazing, we'll pay this much money to be here. And sometimes those communities, they don't realize what that amount of money is. So even that, in that framework, when you have these conversations, I think it will be good to also try to to see how that can be explored, how you can dig into people's to maybe get that real number. Sometimes when you think about currencies as well, how they value that in their currency against how we coming from Europe or from any other country that is maybe more developed to these areas will put a value that is probably 10 times more than what they say, and they live there and they depend on that. So yeah, thank you, because I think I will be coming back to your work, because also is on the Caribbean context, and it's part of the areas where I try to apply the projects I have done in the past. I think it's going to be very related, like there are going to be similarities on these communities, and yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
No, thank you as well. I think that's great, and to tie that in with Ella's question on gender. So in some of our Mayan indigenous communities, for example, in Belize, you have a lot of those scenarios. So for example, lands are communally owned, right? So there's no purchasing of land, etc. So you could imagine giving any form of financial value to a land for them is just out of this world. So there's sometimes always that potential for exploitation, while because the land for them is free and there's so much land around, so they don't tend to understand the value in our context per se. So there's a lot of empowerment required there as well. And just to close off as well with Ella's question around gender, I think the examples are similar to the ones that Zachary made. So for example, in some parts in the Mayan villages, if we need to, we have to have female only meetings, right? Because once the men are present, the women just won't speak. So you would say that they're there and that's participation, but they won't actively engage us because they're not, based on their culture, they're not allowed to speak while their husbands are present. So that is kind of different. But I think there's always we do a gender assessment of the start of each project to understand those dynamics related to women and men, youth, elderly, persons with disability, and take all of those things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of the time and that we're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to mention that the online learning that we're developing for Ricciardo at the bank now, one of the unique features will be the focus on Indigenous peoples. So I think when we were having some discussion the other day, there was talk about how ancestral lands, as you say, they can't be valued. They're sort of beyond value. So that's that element as well, and that was sort of one of the unique things that we were told about working with Indigenous communities compared to working with engaging any community. So I think there's a lot to explore there. But yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to Ricciardo and to Zaki as well, who I think is still online. Unfortunately, we lost our first speaker, Teardil. But thank you so much, Ricciardo and Zaki, and we're giving you a round of applause. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Thank you so much. And thank you, colleagues, as well, for joining us at this relatively late hour and engaging with quite a lot of passion as well. So thank you so much. We'll gather these presentations and we'll probably do a bit of a piece online and put those there. So yeah, just a huge thank you to the presenters for sharing all those words of wisdom, and thank you to the participants online as well. We really appreciate your engagement. Okay, so I will close the session for today, but thank you so much, and I'm sure the conversations will continue. Thank you, Ricciardo, thank you, Zaki, and thank you, colleagues online.